instinctively came to celebrate. At first, it was rough, as if the East German military on the border had not got the word. But the ugliness didn't last. It had an incredible, all-of-a-sudden feeling to it. For millions of Germans, the unimaginable was suddenly reality.
I never believed that it will really happen, that this wall will broken down.
Sometimes history just happens like that. By Friday morning, as someone said, it was as if a cork had burst forth from a giant bottle of champagne.
It's incredible for me. It's I can't describe really my feelings. It's something unreal for me.
It's a development what really comes too fast.
Too fast.
Too fast. I think if there is someone who sleeps for 8 weeks and you told him what happened here, he thinks you're crazy. It's unthinkable.
No one could quite believe it at first, neither the man in the street nor the leaders of government. The Berlin Wall, redundant, coming down after almost 3 decades. The entire division between East and West after World War II, one side free, the other a prison, had been symbolized by the wall. On Friday morning, tens and then hundreds of thousands of East Germans from the Baltic in the north to the Fulda Gap in the south left their homes and made for the frontier. En masse, on cue, they rushed to taste the forbidden fruit, freedom.
Na, das ist eine einmalige Sache, das ist ja ganz prima. Wir wollen mal West-Berlin kennenlernen.
I've been waiting 28 years for this, he told us. Will you come permanently, we asked. How long will you stay? I haven't much money, he said, but I'll stay till I run out of gas. All anyone talks about is die Mauer, the walls.
This wall has been here since before I was born. And when I found out about it, I just started crying. We live here in Berlin. This is so exciting to me to see this happening. I will tell her about freedom and about what this wall meant at one time, and that during her lifetime it came down. I mean, it's not down yet, but it may as well be.
Finally, after weeks of trying to resist the people's will, the East German leader Egon Krenz could appear in public without fear of being heckled into irrelevance. The permission to travel would be permanent, he told an outdoor rally, and soon there would be free elections for the world to monitor. The East German people had their government on the run. On Friday night, the West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and the man who was West Berlin's mayor when the wall went up, Willy Brandt, came to the town hall in West Berlin to savor the moment.
Ich möchte Ihnen heute mal die Hand geben.
For hour after hour, people came and climbed up onto the wall. They came just to be there. Sometimes to harangue the East German soldiers on the ground below, who were, for the most part, good-natured and certainly restrained. There was more than one attempt to make friends. And there were so many memories to be conjured up. August 1961, the wall goes up, and the world stands by and watches. Barbed wire at first, and then concrete blocks. In time, it would become the most sophisticated man-made obstacle to freedom ever built. The East German authorities justified it as a peace dam, protection, they said, against militarists and imperialists. But it was really there to halt the flow of skilled East Germans who were leaving the communist country in droves. In weeks, the nation is a prison. And in the next 28 years, scores of East Germans would die trying to get over it or under it. At the beginning of this year, Erich Honecker, who was responsible for actually building the wall, said that it would stand for 100 years. Until a couple of weeks ago, Honecker was the boss over there. And then, with a little nudge from Mikhail Gorbachev and a big push from his own people, he disappeared into political oblivion. We'll be back in just a moment.
This ABC News special Freedom Weekend is brought to you by Citicorp.
You can see the dream of success in the eyes of people all across America. At Citicorp, we understand the dream. That's why, as Citicorp and Citibank, we've become America's largest financial services organization, already helping 1 in every 5 American families, with more home mortgages, more student loans, more MasterCard and Visa cards than any other company. We'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive.
These are oats. Something you've been hearing quite a lot about lately. But while some cereals turn oats into processed oat flour, new oat bake from Kellogg's uses only whole oats. Then we simply bake them with nuts, raisins, and spices for the first cereal that combines the goodness of whole oats with the goodness of taste. New Kellogg's Oat Bake, the whole oat cereal with the crunchy baked taste.
Of course, you can imagine this tower was 300 feet tall. And when it hit his house, and then you can see how it flattened the metal. So we got a real good whip out of it.
Hurricane Hugo surprised many people. Allstate's catastrophe team was ready.
With Allstate coming and the adjuster coming as quickly as he did, I think you need them. I really think you need to have a good insurance company like Allstate. Allstate came through when they had to. And I'm glad we have it.
My mother gave me this table when I got married, and every week I dusted it with Pledge. Then I gave it to my daughter.
When I got married, and every week I dust it with Pledge.
For 30 years, it's had a beautiful shine, week after week.
Year after year, with no buildup. End dust just evaporates, leaving wood looking as dry and unprotected as before. But a Pledge shine protects beautifully. And when my daughter gets married...
Yeah, never!
With Pledge, dusting can be beautiful.
Monday, MacGyver travels to Africa to help the plight of the endangered rhinos. Then,
are you ready for the football? Cincinnati Bengals tackle their division rivals, the Houston Oilers, on ABC's NFL Monday Night Football.
So much has happened here on this Freedom Weekend. Quite literally, we are watching the political landscape of Europe change before our eyes. And it has been almost as if no one could truly grasp how overwhelming the desire was in East Germany to breach that wall in person. Before dawn, Saturday morning on the Bernauer Strasse in East Berlin. Watch carefully. Here, where East Germans had once jumped from apartment buildings to get over the wall, and where they had sometimes died trying, the East German army was now bulldozing another opening. By first light on Saturday, the word of open borders and a travel permit for the asking had penetrated every East German household. This was the Bernauer Strasse by mid-morning. And this scene was being repeated at permanent and makeshift checkpoints all along the frontier, 860 miles of it. And as we stood in line after line and talked to East Germans, something else about this Freedom Weekend became dramatically apparent. There has been an explosion of free speech. Now we are talking like crazy, said one woman. Get rid of the communist bosses, said one after the other. On this weekend, it was also possible for a Western reporter to ask an East German soldier what he thought of the situation and get a candid answer.
Not so many problems if we met this a bit earlier.
So in other words, if the wall had been open earlier and people could have come and gone, there wouldn't have been so many problems in your country.
Well.
So much for the well-worn German phrase, whose bread I eat, whose song I sing. Here's another local explanation. With almost 3 million East Germans visiting the West this weekend, almost 3 million, how do you tell East Germans from West Germans? Well, a West German in a shop says, I want such and such. An East German says, do you have such and such? And the East Germans are the ones in the enormous lines outside West German banks. Every man, woman, and child who has come across the border this weekend has been given 100 marks by the West German government, about $50. Kind of a token welcome to the great consumer society. A lot of money in East Germany, not much in West Berlin. So as East Germans swarm through all the glitter that West Berlin has so deliberately put on display for the last 3 decades, they were well aware how little they could afford. It's like we've seen on television, said a woman, but it's so expensive. And as they made their way home, the vast majority went home. Most had made very small purchases. Soap powder, a shower curtain, a pair of jeans, bubble bath, a lot of fresh fruit, and something for the children for Christmas. And so many of them wore a new smile. It is such a reminder. No sooner is there the right to travel than the need to flee is eliminated. Of more than 3 million visitors this weekend, fewer than 10,000 have reportedly asked to stay in the West. A lot of European newspapers this weekend have been saying exodus to the promised land. But maybe it isn't the promised land for all East Germans. We'll discuss that in just a moment with one of the leading opposition politicians. It has been, however, one breathtaking moment after the other. As you probably know, ever since World War II ended, with the Russians over there and the Allies over here, those same 4 powers have each had an area of jurisdiction. The Soviets over there, the French, the British, and the Americans over here. The most famous crossing point, not far here, between East and West, Checkpoint Charlie in the American sector. The most famous crossing point, that is, until this morning. Look again. On this Sunday morning, with approaching winter's chill in the air, Berlin, symbolically at least, became one city again. This time, they broke through the wall at the Potsdamer Platz. Until 1945, this was the very center of Berlin. And no sooner had the wall been breached yet again than the mayors of East and West Berlin met in the opening to shake hands. I'm happy, said the mayor of East Berlin. This is where the heart of Berlin will beat again, said the mayor of West Berlin. Suddenly, this is Europe's busiest intersection. What memories there are here. A stone's throw from where Hitler died in his bunker, where in 1953 East German workers revolted, briefly, against Soviet tanks, where in 1961 they actually built the first concrete section of the wall. Just look at what a difference freedom makes. And all along this section of the wall today, one freelance wrecking crew after another. What does a child bring to the wall in 1989? A hammer and a chisel. Could they ever close this wall again? Not on your life, said an East German visitor. We'd bury them in ashes. And she said it with such passion, and so many other East Germans have said the same thing. There's no going back as far as this is concerned. Once this wall has been breached, it will remain breached, and they want more. Joining us here on our platform this evening, and we have only one camera, is Dr. Wolfgang Ullmann, who is the co-founder of one of the most influential opposition movements in East Germany, the New Democracy Movement. We thank you for coming. Let me ask you a simple question. How did you get across the wall tonight?
By your car. It was very easy to do.
Nobody said anything to you?
No, I got my visa and here I am.
When did you come across the wall first this weekend?
This evening.
This is your first trip across?
Yes. No, I've been very often in West Berlin. But on this weekend, I came for the first time last night.
Well, we're very touched that you came and joined us this evening. And
so am I.
I wonder if you'd give us some sense of a lot of things, obviously, but a lot of people have been somewhat surprised. They say they're surprised by the fact that so many East Germans and East Berliners, having been here for the day, have gone home. Should we have been surprised?
Not for see them going home, but I'm surprised that they could come here. That I didn't expect anyway. And I couldn't imagine this happening so fast.
It's happened all in about 5 or 6 weeks, it seems.
Yes, yes.
Do you think that many East Germans, now having the freedom to travel here, will want to stay in West Berlin or in West Germany?
Maybe some, but it seems to me we now got to the turning point that a lot of people will come to see and visit and then go back and stay in our country.
So it really was, as many of us have said, it was the freedom to travel, not necessarily the desire to stay away from home.
That's right.
Is it true, as some people have told me over the weekend, that there's an enormous pride in the German Democratic Republic, even though it is a...
Yes.
Even though we often see it as a communist state overrun by repression?
Yes, and I share this pride because the change was made by the people of this country. Walking out in the streets and shouting democracy just now, and the nation, that's us.
And what is going to happen just now, now that you have won this?
We are preparing for free elections and transformation of our constitution.
And how long do you think that will take?
Oh, difficult to answer. Maybe some months.
I have heard that some of you in the opposition movement don't want free elections too quickly because you haven't had a chance to get organized.
Yes, but I don't agree with this opinion. We must have this as soon as possible.
And how soon do you think that can be?
Oh, maybe in the end of this year and the beginning of the new one.
And what's going to happen to the Communist Party in the German Democratic Republic?
Maybe what's going to happen is that we come to what the action program of the SED now says, coalition of democratic nature. So SED would be one power among others.
But do you think that East Germany, as we call it, will continue to be essentially a socialist state?
That's what at least I and my group is trying to push forward. And of course, a new kind, a democratic one of socialism.
So it is true then, as we've heard, that a lot of people who live in East Germany have found the sort of the consumer society of West Germany just a little too much.
Maybe, yes.
Could you explain that a bit more?
Now, I can explain it because our people had to experience 40 years of bondage, and they are absolutely not willing to undergo this any longer, and so they went away.
But I think a lot of Americans believe, Dr. Ullman, that West Germany, with all the available consumer goods, the cars and the television sets and the videos and everything else, is what people in East Germany want.
Of course, because they don't want to be excluded from modern life, and that's absolutely justified. And I can understand this very well, that young people want to have modern cars and not old-fashioned ones.
Do you think it will come in time?
Yes, yes.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come across the wall tonight. I know it's an astonishing change in all of your lives, and I hope it's one that fulfills you.
That's true. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you
very much. Don't fall off the platform. Let me just move you over here a bit, if I may, or move the camera this way. Dr. Wolfgang Ullmann, who is the co-founder of the New Democracy Movement. It's those people you've seen meeting in the famous Gethsemane Church over on the east side of Berlin in the last many weeks. And of course, they're among the people marching in Leipzig and Dresden and other cities around East Germany.
And
now,
could I ask you a favor?
Yes, please, sir.
Say my greetings to the friends of mine in the United States, in Columbus, Ohio, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and in Norwich and Thistles, Vermont.
By all means, to all of your friends. In fact, I think you just said hello to them. Thank you, Dr. Ullmann, very much again. Great pleasure, great honor, sir. Now don't fall off.
No.
As I said at the beginning, we have only one camera here on our tiny platform, to which we now welcome Don Cladston. We've concentrated here on Berlin, of course. This has always been the fulcrum, always been the focal point of tension and all other sort of divisions between East and West. But it's all been going up and down 860 miles of the East German-West German frontier over the weekend. And Don, you've been wandering up and down the frontier. And is this being repeated everywhere you go?
Well, we headed to the frontier today, or yesterday, 300 miles away. And I wouldn't advise a leisurely drive to that particular part of the frontier, because you immediately run into a 50-mile-long traffic jam, and it's all East Germans. I mean, and they're sitting in their car. It's a 12-hour trip. but it's a measure also of just how intensely curious they are about how life is on the other side.
You've been driving up and down the frontier. You went down towards the Fulda Gap, I know.
That's right.
A lot of people, at least here and elsewhere in the world, are talking about reunification between East and West. Do you get any sense of people's feelings?
I get a sense that they merely want to take a look at a part of the world that they've never had a chance to see in their lives. They aren't really talking about reunification, because I think what is even more amazing than the long line of cars of East Germans heading across the border is that they're all coming back. They're all coming back. I got up just before 6 o'clock this morning in the village of Hof in West Germany, and I looked out my hotel window, and the streets were full. The sidewalks were full of people, families, all East Germans, out for, well, what seemed like a simple stroll during a warm summer day. They wanted to see a part of the world again that they hadn't had a glimpse of before.
So you have found it as astonishing as everybody else has?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they weren't talking about reunification. They were talking about a visit and then going home again. And as they did, it was interesting to see the West Germans standing on bridges over the autoroutes, waving to them, waving handkerchiefs, and they were waving back. It was touching.
Thanks, Don, very much. Don Klaschip. In fact, I feel a little badly we didn't talk to Dr. Ullman about this question of reunification. Perhaps we can find him and bring him back at the end of the broadcast. But whether it's reunification or not that people are concentrating on this weekend, the post-war order in Europe has changed in the space of a few weeks. And on this Freedom Weekend, we get a glimpse of the very, very, very complicated future. We'll go on in just a minute.
It's not surprising to find the Subaru Justy at the most prestigious business schools. After all, it's one of the most economical cars in America. It's not surprising to find the Justy at leading...
Pee-wee store at JCPenney. Wow.
Citicorp, America's first global financial services corporation, has the power and the resources to help you with all your financial needs.
This ABC News special Freedom Weekend will continue after this word from our local
agenda on World News Tonight. For a year, finding solutions. Monday, a unique plan will desegregate Boston schools and make each school stronger. The American Agenda. Watch Peter Jennings on ABC's World News Tonight, Monday.
Texas has a rich history of volunteerism.
I received word from Colonel Fannin. Can't help us. So what I need now is a commitment. I'm asking all those joining me to cross this line.
Today, that same spirit lives in thousands of volunteers who give their time to worthwhile community projects. They're the same people you turn to every day for a reliable supply of electricity.
True Grit, tonight at 10:30 here on 13.
Freedom Weekend, the opening of the wall. Here again from West Berlin, Peter Jennings.
There's been a great deal of talk about this question of reunification. It's worth noting again, I think, what Dr. Ullman said and what so many East Germans have said to us this weekend. East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, albeit a communist state, is still a legitimate state, and there is no rush over there for reunification, and there's not even overwhelming enthusiasm for it in West Germany. But in the short-term sense, the Chancellor of West Germany and the leader, the present leader of East Germany, Egon Krenz and Helmut Kohl, have agreed that they're going to meet at some point before the end of the year, and Krenz, who is the East German leader, made it very bluntly clear that this question of reunification was not going to be on the agenda. Still, it's a subject that people all over the world, given the history of Germany and the Allied memory of Germany in World War I and II, which is going to be talked about almost constantly. Now, the question is, how did we get here? Dr. Ullman mentioned, again, as so many others have, that it all seemed to happen so quickly. A bit of history from ABC's Jack Smith.
May this year,
communist Hungary begins taking down its barbed wire Iron Curtain border fence with neighboring Austria. The Iron Curtain begins to come apart as the Hungarian Communist Party embarks on a series of democratic and free market reforms. Within weeks, East Germans vacationing in Hungary begin slipping through the Hungarian border to the west. Hungary finally allows them to freely cross, and more than 30,000 do. The East German refugees are welcomed in West Germany with food, shelter, and automatic citizenship. In Poland, meanwhile, imminent economic collapse has forced the communist leadership there to accept democratic reforms as well. In June, the once outlawed independent Polish trade union Solidarity wins the first free elections in Poland since World War II. A non-communist government is elected under Prime Minister Tadeusz Mazowiecki, a member of Solidarity. In October, Hungary, which promises to hold free elections next year, abolishes its Communist Party, renaming it the Socialist Party, and declares itself a democracy. Pressure on hardline communist East Germany grows. As Hungary renounces communism, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev visits East Germany and tells its leaders the satellites are free to find their own way to socialism, and that Soviet troops and tanks will no longer prop up unpopular East Bloc regimes, including their own. Within days, East Germany's aging Communist Party boss, Erich Honecker, is quietly nudged aside and is replaced by 52-year-old Egon Krenz, the youngest member of the ruling East German Politburo. Almost daily, mass demonstrations begin taking place in cities across East Germany. Opposition groups begin surfacing, demanding democratic reform. But without Soviet backing, East Germany's leaders decide not to use force to suppress the demonstrations. The turmoil spreads. In hardline Czechoslovakia, there are demonstrations for reform, and in Bulgaria, the first known pro-democracy rally in that country's communist history. Then, last weekend, another mass exodus from East Germany. For weeks, thousands of disgruntled East Germans pile up, this time in communist Czechoslovakia. The East German regime last weekend announces they are free to leave Czechoslovakia for the West. As many as 300 East German refugees an hour begin arriving through Czechoslovakia. Within 5 days, 50,000 have gone to the West, and the exodus shows no sign of stopping, aggravating an already severe labor shortage in East Germany. The crisis in East Germany deepens, and party boss Egon Krenz, in power for less than a month, begins this week's dizzying scramble to contain popular discontent. Tuesday, the 44-member cabinet resigns. Wednesday, the Politburo as well. Then Krenz promises free and open elections and says opposition parties will be legalized. Finally, in a last effort to keep the discontent from exploding, East Germany Thursday opens its borders. The wall that has divided Berlin for 28 long years still stands, but it has been rendered meaningless. Jack Smith, ABC News, West Berlin.
Put under the category of stunning Soviet acquiescence to this, or really under that same category put Soviet encouragement. 5 weeks ago, we were over there on the eastern side of the wall for the 40th anniversary of the German Democratic Republic. You may recall that Mr. Gorbachev came. In public, he was very circumspect with Erich Honecker, who was then the boss. But as it's now been confirmed to us by Mr. Gorbachev's own aides behind the scenes, he was making it clear it was time to change. It was time to move on. So how do the Soviets react to this weekend? In Moscow, ABC's Jim Laurie.
Soviet viewers are seeing these pictures too. The media here have embraced the events in Berlin with excitement and support.
9 дней, которые потрясли мир.
Soviet television tonight called the last 9 days, days that shook the world. Every evening there have been reports from Berlin portraying families reunited, happy German crowds, and the wall beginning to come tumbling down. The TASS news agency describing the pulling down of the wall as surely a positive and important fact. The Soviet Foreign Ministry saying it was taking the dramatic events in stride.
We expected that the new leadership of the German Democratic Republic will act on their word. We expected that to be dramatic, and this is what we saw. There is no sense of crisis in the foreign ministry. There is no sense of crisis.
But a Soviet news editor saw it as another example of communist rule as we've known it coming to an end.
We are looking, we are watching as bureaucratic administrative socialism is dying. It's terrible agony, it's terrible death, but this kind of socialism is dying.
The Soviets have acknowledged that Mikhail Gorbachev encouraged the East German leader towards reform when he visited Moscow early in the month. But they also make it plain that Moscow cannot accept one possible consequence of the changes in Germany. There can be no redrawing of German borders. Soviet TV told its viewers Germans were not striving for reunification. The East German Soviet TV said want to keep their social system and were not anxious to fight for a piece of the capitalist West German pie. As to reunification, it is, as one Soviet official put it, not an issue for this century.
Europe is divided as a result of the war, as a result of NATO and Warsaw Pact, and it's unrealistic to talk in terms of reunification now.
The Soviets do say they are willing to negotiate the reduction of Warsaw Pact and NATO forces stationed in the two Germanys. There are 380,000 Soviet troops in East Germany. The Soviet support for East German reform does raise again the question of how far Moscow will let things in Eastern Europe go. Officially, the new line is very far indeed.
The only limit is the wishes of their people. Freedom of choice is freedom of choice. We are not playing with words. We mean what we say.
But at home there are signs Mikhail Gorbachev would like to rein in change. In places like Lithuania on the Baltic, where people last week challenged the Revolution Day military parade, or far to the south in Moldavia, where there have been several days of civil disturbances. Moscow is warning of freedom of choice gone too far and is threatening harsher measures. But it also seems clear that precisely because Moscow is preoccupied with domestic troubles, it is prepared to accept the inevitable in Eastern Europe. A process of change which got its initial impetus from the words and actions of Mikhail Gorbachev himself. Peter?
Well, Jim Laurie is still standing by live in Moscow. Jim, given the fact that radio and television make it impossible to keep democracy a secret anymore, I have a question for you about the Soviet Union. If the Soviets continue to see what's happening here, people from Eastern Europe having the freedom to come across to the West, what are the continuing risks there for Mr. Gorbachev that things will get out of control at home?
Well, Peter, I would say that things have gone a long way towards reform here in the Soviet Union, but it is also true that Mr. Gorbachev has a tremendous problem on his hand trying to deal with all the various nationalities in this country. And as we've seen in the last few days, he is beginning to realize he may have to deal harshly with some of these groups that are clamoring for more independence. There certainly will be a carryover into this country, greater expectations here, more demands for even more freedom and more economic restructuring, Peter.
And Jim, as best you can tell, does what's happening here lead Mr. Gorbachev to think that the Soviet-U.S. relationship is going to get easier now, that there could, for example, be a more serious drawing down of either weapons or conventional arms?
Well, that certainly is the hope. In every speech that Mr. Gorbachev makes, he talks of his new European home, his new political thinking. A foreign ministry official today told us that what they're looking for is a new security arrangement where both the U.S. and the Soviet Union would feel secure without the need for nuclear weapons and without large numbers of troops on either side, particularly the large numbers of troops both in East and West Germany.
Okay, Jim Laurie, thanks very much. Jim Laurie, ABC News Bureau Chief in Moscow. Joining us here on our little vantage point over the wall is our Chief Overseas Diplomatic Correspondent, Barry Dunsmore. Barry, you've been a lot of time this weekend in East Berlin. Do you get any sense of where you think they want to go in terms of the larger international community?
Well, the interesting thing is that at the present time, the East German opposition and most East Germans have actually got what they asked for. There's a whole range of reforms that have been promised in the last few days. And as a matter of fact, it's just been announced tonight that Mr. Krenz is going to have a Communist Party Congress, at which time it's entirely possible that the entire Central Committee could be changed and he could be out too. So all of the things that they have really asked for, they're getting. The question then becomes, are they going to be satisfied with that? I frankly think they may well be. And for all of the talk there is about German reunification and the notion that the two Germanys will inevitably have to get together, I happen to believe that may not be the case. I think that there are historical reasons why it's entirely possible that two states could exist.
And what's the sense you get as you wander around East Berlin? Though, mind you, a lot of the streets were empty today when you were over there. Everybody was over here.
Well, it was very amazing because for the first part of the day, there virtually wasn't a soul in a city of 1.3 million. But by the late afternoon, people started coming back. And I talked to a lot of them as they were coming through the wall. They were happy, they enjoyed it. But it's amazing how many people said, an awful lot of people over there, it's terribly expensive, and we're glad to be home. We're just happy that we can go there if we feel like it.
And did you yourself ever find anybody over there who thought this was going to happen? I haven't met a single person who wasn't surprised.
It was a total surprise to them, and of course it certainly was to us.
You bet. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Barry Dunsmore. We're going to come back in just a moment and talk to one of America's best Sovietologists, Bob Legvold, and we'll also talk to Moscow again on what the view is of this whole story from there, from a Soviet point of view.
These are oats. Something you've been hearing quite a lot about lately. But while some cereals turn oats into processed oat flour, new oat bake from Kellogg's uses only whole oats. Then we simply bake them with nuts, raisins, and spices for the first cereal that combines the goodness of whole oats with the goodness of baked taste. New Kellogg's Oat Bake, the whole oat cereal with the crunchy baked taste.
Winning. It's something you can see in the sheet metal, feel in the corners. It's the result of a total design commitment. It's also the result of producing the best-built American cars. And the end result is what you've made us, America's best-selling cars, again this year. Ford, winning across America, winning the world over.
Winning the world over. Have you driven a Ford lately?
Of course, you can imagine this tower was 300 feet tall. And when it hit his house, and then you see how it flattened the metal. So we got a real good whip out of it.
Hurricane Hugo surprised many people. Allstate's catastrophe team was ready.
With Allstate coming and the adjuster coming as quickly as he did, I think you need them. I really think you need to have a good insurance company like Allstate. Allstate came through when they had to, and I'm glad we have it.
MasterCard. This holiday, no other card makes more moments merrier. And with nearly 3 times the acceptance of American Express, it's one Christmas card everyone will welcome. MasterCard. Master the moment.
Now, almost every time you use MasterCard before December 31st, you increase your chances of winning your MasterCard bills paid up to $18,000 a year till the 21st century. MasterCard. Master the moment until the 21st century.
Look what I got.
Farrah Fawcett gives the performance of her career.
That woman doesn't love. She devours.
Based on a true story, Small Sacrifices, tonight.
And now from the German view to the Soviet-American view. I misled you slightly. Our Soviet guest, Nikolai Shishkin, who's a consultant to the Central Committee, is in Boston, not in Moscow. And with him is Bob Legvold, who's often seen on ABC, the director of the Harriman Institute for Soviet Studies at Columbia University. Nikolai and Bob, I'd like to ask you both the obvious question at the first, beginning with you, Nikolai, if I may. How surprised were you with the events here in the last 5 days?
I think everybody's surprised with such events. That's great events.
And you, Bob Legvold?
Well, I think obviously it is a surprise, although, you know, once things began moving in East Germany and so rapidly in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I suppose in some sense there was a certain inevitability that they would have to allow free travel between the two Berlins.
Nikolai, what do you think this means to Soviet-American relations?
I hope that's the hard time for us to cooperate. I think we can open a new era in Soviet-American relations, the era of cooperation.
Can you be more specific what that means in terms of what's happening here in Europe?
You see, it's necessary for us to reconsider our policy in Europe, and maybe our views will be more simultaneous than in previous years. And maybe some of our ideas about common European home will be in implementation.
Does it make sense to you, for example, there could be a rapid de-escalation of both Soviet and American military presence in this part of Europe?
I hope so. I think that it will stimulate the Vienna talks.
Bob Legwold, are we all going a bit too fast with this? Are we being unrealistic to think of that happening in a short period of time?
No, I think that within the next year or two we're going to make very major steps toward a substantial cut in conventional forces, and that was coming even before these events in East Germany. The Soviet leadership is very eager to restructure the military balance in Europe, but now this is part of something much larger. Change is moving very rapidly in Europe. In many respects, change in Eastern Europe is out of control, and that creates a new common stake between the United States and the Soviet Union, between the East and the West, and that is to make sure that this change does not produce major instability.
Let me ask you both to deal with this question of reunification from your own national points of view. Bob Legwold, from an American point of view, should we be worried about a reunified Germany at the center of Europe?
I don't think the old historic concern about a powerful reunited Germany is any longer the pertinent concern. But the process itself is important because it's unnerving to Germany's neighbors in France, in Poland, and it's going to have a considerable effect on this problem of controlling change with its potential instability. Nonetheless, in general, if the German people wish to move in that direction, so should they be permitted to do so. Frankly, however, I don't think that's going to be immediately on the agenda. I don't think that's where things are going.
Nikolai Shishkin, 20 million Russians died at the hands of Germans in World War II. What do you think of reunification?
I'm afraid that I quite agree with Bob. And you see, simply it's necessary to understand that we mustn't be impatient. We must be persistent, patient, and wise. And I think we must think about the common European home, and maybe in that home the German nation will find their own quite comfortable flat.
Nikolai and Bob, again, Germany's in almost West Germany particularly is in an enviable place. Immensely important to the Western Alliance, perhaps the robust democracy in all of Europe, immensely important to the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc in terms of future development, aid, economic assistance. Isn't it true, Nikolai, that the West Germans can behave almost as they want?
Oh, that's difficult to answer, really, but I think that we must respect the choice of the German people on both sides, either West Germany or East Germany. But for us, it's very important, really, to have good connections, good economic, political ties with East Germany, and I think good economic and political ties with Bonn.
And a final comment on that subject from you, Bob Legwold.
Well, from my point of view, West Germany is also facing a number of important dilemmas. After all, the West Germans are the key party in providing economic assistance to Poland and to Hungary, and if now they also have to provide considerable aid to the East Germans, there's going to be a tough choice for the West Germans. In addition, the entire framework of Europe in the post-war period has been designed to incorporate Western Germany into a Western Europe that's divided from the East, not just by the NATO alliance, but by the European community. Now there's going to be a pull for the West Germans toward Eastern Europe, and it's going to create some difficult choices as Germany, as a part of Western Europe, moves toward 1992. There will be real dilemmas there. And finally, the West Germans have to be conscious of the impact this has on their neighbors, both in the East and the West, if the process does appear to move too rapidly toward reunification.
Bob Legwold, Nikolai Shishkin, thank you very much. As we said at the beginning, we're watching the political map of Europe change before our eyes. We'll be back in just a moment.
We help more Americans go to college, and we...
Terrible cold. It's just awful. Oh.
This rapidly changing order in Europe has caught so many people off base, caught so many people by surprise, and it's been said repeatedly that while it's happened with this enormous speed, how well is the West prepared to meet the new challenges that it throws up? Standing by to talk to us live from Washington is our White House correspondent, Britt Hume. Britt, just how surprised was the Bush administration?
Well, Peter, you'll recall that the president had been in Eastern Europe this summer. He had called for the Berlin Wall to come down, but for all of that, there was no sign that anyone in his administration, including himself, or really anyone in Washington, expected this to happen. And for a time, at least, Peter, it seemed to catch the president on the wrong foot. Americans who tuned in television news coverage of the stunning development in Germany Thursday were treated to the spectacle of a president who seemed a little out of sorts about the whole thing.
We're saluting those who can move forward with democracy. We are encouraging the concept of a Europe whole and free, and so we just welcome it.
But this was, after all, a major goal of American and Allied policy for nearly 30 years, and now it had happened. Why so solemn?
I'm elated. I'm just not an emotional kind of guy. I mean, I'm very pleased, and I've been very pleased with a lot of other developments.
Angered by charges he was failing to be a champion of democracy, the president had changed his tone, if not his tune, by the next day, even giving himself a little credit for events.
And I called upon the Soviet Union to support self-determination for the nations of Eastern and Central Europe and to tear down the Iron Curtain. And now we're seeing it happen.
But as Secretary of State Baker made clear on This Week with David Brinkley today, the prevailing administration approach to the crumbling of the Soviet Empire remains caution.
With respect to Eastern Europe, it means welcoming steps such as this, progress such as this, but not overreacting to it and not doing so in a manner that would seek to take unilateral advantage or in any way encourage instability. Be prepared to help.
Instability is an administration fear in Eastern Europe and especially in the Soviet Union.
I think Mr. Gorbachev's going to be in for a very rough winter. I think when you look at the enormous problems in their economy, it's a basket case at this point, in terrible condition, labor strife, ethnic unrest.
The good news for the president and the events in Berlin is that he had already set a meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. If he were only getting around to that now, the critics who say that he is behind the curve of events would be even louder. The bad news, or at least a concern for the administration, is that Mr. Gorbachev may now feel impelled by the events in Berlin to make some bold new proposals, such as the dismantling of the Warsaw Pact and NATO, something the administration considers grossly premature. Peter?
But I was going to ask you about this question of instability. Barry Dunsmore, our diplomatic correspondent, was saying to me earlier today that one of the fears here is that this undermines Mr. Gorbachev, or at least risks undermining him. Does that mean Mr. Bush has to give something to Mr. Gorbachev at Malta?
Well, I think, Peter, that there is a considerable expectation in the administration that what this meeting at Malta is largely going to be about is the economy and what can be done in the West to help the Soviet economy, which would, of course, do something to deal with the unrest. It wouldn't deal with that ethnic unrest, of course. That's a problem that probably is totally internal. But that is a concern. The administration says it wants perestroika to succeed. No doubt it does, but it's worried.
Who in the administration really does fear this instability to which you refer, that this might all be reversible, for example?
Well, I'm not sure there's any feeling here that it could be reversible. I think that, at least not in the short run, I think the feeling is that what is likely to happen is that more barriers will come tumbling down, more reforms will be instituted, and what forces that will set in motion, nobody knows. Nobody knows how fast it is all going to go. What the long-term effects of that are is, of course, what everybody worries about.
Jack McWethy, our chief national security correspondent, standing by at the State Department in Washington. John, what do the professionals think of this, the people who make their living trying to understand what Germany and other European nations are going to do?
Well, I think at this point, Peter, the entire U.S. government is being a little bit cautious, partly because some of those professionals are looking at what the situation is over there. There are more than 1 million men under arms on both sides of that border. The mere fact that there have been openings made in the wall does not mean that those men have gone home. They are still there, they are still heavily armed, and they are still capable of doing all sorts of different things. What is the concern is that the mood of the party, which is now underway, the gayness, the happiness, could get turned by some sort of incident. So the U.S. is watching that very closely. Thus far, there has been no indication that that's going to happen, but it's the kind of thing that cannot be ignored when things appear to be running sort of out of control.
I want to bring Barry Dunsmore back in for just a moment here in Berlin by the wall, because, Barry, we've been talking about what the U.S., you can't hear Washington, but what the U.S. could or could not or should not do with the Soviets. Now, what do you think the Soviets want from the United States of Malta?
I think that the best thing that Mr. Bush can do is generally to make life easier for Mr. Gorbachev by being willing to consider major reductions in arms, in manpower, to be willing to provide technology transfers. In other words, to set aside the notion that this is the major adversary in the world and recognize that so much has now changed that we really are dealing with an entirely new set of rules. I think there's a certain irony that the map of the world was drawn at the end of the war in a place called Yalta, and now we have this very important meeting in a place called Malta. I think it will be every bit as important, and I think it could result in as fundamental a change in the world as we had at 1945.
Jim Laurie is still standing by in Moscow. Jim, do you suspect, or does anybody in Moscow suspect, that Mr. Gorbachev will have something up his sleeve for Malta?
There has been a good deal of talk here, Peter, about the question of NATO forces versus the Warsaw Pact forces. The Soviets are on record as saying that they're willing to discuss the pulling down of Warsaw Pact forces if the U.S. would discuss the NATO forces. That could be brought up. It's been mentioned here a number of times by foreign ministry officials.
Okay, I want to just go around all of you just for a very quick final reaction, a personal reaction as to what you've been watching in the last few days.
Well, it's the most exciting week of my life, quite simply.
That's very brief. Brit Hume in Washington.
Well, Peter, I must tell you that last weekend while I was working, the East Germans said that they were going to allow all of the citizens that wanted to go out through Prague and other places to go. And it occurred to me that under those circumstances, they wouldn't be able to stem the tide of people feeling that they had to leave and leave for good. This seems to have been something done only to get people to stay.
Jack McWethy.
Peter, watching the U.S. government react to this has been a real treat. American officials simply were stunned by this. I think every reporter that watched the U.S. try to scramble and then watched what's happening over where you are has got to be standing just with his mouth open. It's amazing.
I must confess that is an impression we get here in Berlin, that many governments in many parts of the world have tried very hard to catch up to the people of East Germany, and we've been so exposed to them in East Berlin particularly. They have a mind of their own now. They have a determination, the likes of which I don't think anybody imagined they had. After having been repressed for so many years, they've thrown back all the covers. You heard people say tonight on this broadcast that they'd bury their leadership in ashes if they ever tried to close the wall. There was that woman who said we no longer have to hide inside ourselves. And seeing the faces as they've come across this wall, 3 million people in one weekend come to visit a place which was for so long forbidden. It has been a stunning experience. Thank you for joining us. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night from Berlin.
Freedom Weekend has been an ABC News special. Stay tuned for Life Goes On, which follows immediately.
This has been a special presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.